Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. For those of you who are new, my name is Emmanuel, and we've actually been working on an amazing application called Yummy. It's a food ordering app. And for those of you who are interested in adding some project to your portfolio, then this is an amazing one to add. And it's actually very interesting. You're going to learn a lot of things. So just go ahead, click on this link. I think is maybe here or here, wherever. Just click on that and, just learn, right? So what we're going to be doing from now is we're going to be working on or learning about data persistence, and today we're going to be learning about user defaults, right? And before we actually get to what user defaults does, let's actually see the problem, right? So just go ahead, create a new project. I have a blank project over here, and what we're going to do is we're going to head over to our main.storyboard. And the first thing we want to do here is we want to add a switch. So just hold down Command Shift and L, or just click on this icon right at the top over here. Good. And we're going to add a switch to the view. So just hold down Control, click and drag this to the view, and hold down Shift, click on center horizontally and vertically, and press Enter. Then I'm going to click on this icon right at the bottom just to refresh the constraints, and this is good. Great. Now the next thing we want to do is we're going to bring up the attributes part of it. So just open this guy up, and we want to set the default state of the initial state to be off. All right. And next, what we want to do actually is whenever you toggle the switch on, we want to change the background color of the view so that it becomes orange. So just to signify that there's light. All right. Then if you toggle it back off, we want to change the background color to a dark gray. So I'm going to click on the background and we're going to select dark gray over here. Awesome. So the next thing we want to do is we want to bring up the assistant editor and basically create an action for the switch, so that, and I'm going to call this switch toggled, and this function is going to be triggered whenever the switch is toggled, right? So right, this is great. So let's go into the view controller, and what we want to do is whenever you toggle the switch on or off, we want to set the background color of the view to be, so depending on the state of the switch, so sender dot is on. So remember, sender is the switch. So we want to check if the switch is on. If it is on, we want to set the background color to orange. Otherwise, we want to set it to dark gray. Perfect. All right. So now let's go ahead and run this and let's see if that works. So I'm going to click on this. Ooh, shining bright. I'm going to turn it off. Ooh, dark. So this is good. It works well. Now let's go ahead and refresh. We want to restart the application. So imagine the user closes the application and enter. Ooh. So it went back to off. I want it to remain on. So what do we do? So this is a very typical example of when we want to use user defaults, because what user defaults allows us to do is we can store simple data like this, so whether or not the switch was on or off, and when we restart the app, we can check our user defaults database and basically get the value and then reconfigure our app to suit that particular value. So let me show you what I mean. Now, in order for us to add data to the user defaults is extremely simple, right? It's extremely simple. So what we want to do is right over here, whenever the switch is toggled, we want to save the state of the switch to our user defaults. So what we're going to do is we're going to write down user defaults like this and say standard. And this standard is actually just a shared instance of the user defaults. You may also want to create your own instance like this. Let user defaults if you want to go that route. Or you could also create a unique one with a unique name, right? You may want to do whatever that is, but for our scenario, right, it's okay for us to just simply use the standard. Okay, so I'm going to be using the shared instance, and what I want to do here is I want to save data to the user defaults. So I'm going to say set value, and you can see set value takes two parameters. The first one is the value you want to save, and this is actually of type any. So you can store Boolean, integer, string, or even whatever custom object you have. So for now, what we want to store is actually a Boolean of the current state of the switch. So I'm just going to put sender.isOn. All right. Now this key is whatever name you want to use to uniquely identify this particular data that you're trying to store. So you can just think of it as the name. So you want to store data that you're going to identify as this name. Just think of it as you giving a name to a child. So when you call, or even the function, when you call the function by the name, then it returns or performs the action. So the same thing happens over here. We're storing this data, and we're storing this data under the name is on. Or you can store with whatever name you want, switch is on, or something, switch is on. Right? So whatever name you want, but you just got to make sure that it is unique. Okay? So this is the key that we're going to use to identify or retrieve this data, to save or retrieve this data. Right? So now we've been able to store this data in the user defaults. The next thing we actually need to do is whenever the system launches, we want to get the previous or the stored data of the switch, and we want to basically update our UI. So how do we get the data from the user defaults? It's very simple as well. I'm just going to write user defaults, and we're going to be using the standard as well. And to get the data, I'm just going to write object like this. So this is going to be object for key. And let's actually just see what this returns. I'm going to say let is on, because this is the kind of data we're trying to get. So whenever we type user defaults or standard object, this actually returns data of type any. All right. So when we retrieve data like this, we can actually go ahead and do some modifications or whatever and just change it to whatever type we want. But there are some default types that we can actually just use. So for example, right here we're storing data of type Boolean. All right, so we can actually retrieve data from the user defaults as Boolean. So if you just type bool over here, you're going to see that there's we're going to be retrieving data, and this data should be of type Boolean. So if I hold down Option and click on this, you're going to see that this is of type Boolean. So the same thing goes for integer, like this, integer. And if we hold down Option, click on this, you can see that this is type integer, right? So this is very good. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and write bool like this. So remember, you need to get data, but how do we find what kind of data you want, right? You need to specify the name. So I'm just going to copy this name and paste this over here like this. And now we have the current state of the switch. So what we want to do is we want to update our background image. So I could just go ahead and write this exact same line, but you shouldn't. Whenever you see yourself writing code that is very identical twice, then maybe you want to refactor and basically just have it once. So that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to create a function right over here, a private function, and we're going to say update background, right? So I'm just going to call it update background, and now this is going to do this. So I'm just going to cut that, paste this over here, and it requires this particular value. So I'm just going to pass that in as a parameter. So is on, this is going to be of type bool. So this is great. Now how do we use this? Right over here, we're just going to call update background is on, is going to be sender dot is on. Awesome. So it's just basically the same thing we've been doing, but we've just refactored and moved this guy into a function. So because of this, we can simply update our background by simply using the update background function, and for is on, we're just going to pass in the value that we got from our user defaults. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this and let's see what we have. All right, so this is our application and the initial state is off. So I'm going to turn this guy on, and now I'm going to restart the app, and what we expect to see is the view is still on. Perfect. Ooh, but it seems we forgot to also leave the switch on. So what we're going to do is we're going to say whenever you toggle it on, or whenever we come back, we want to also update the state of the switch to make sure that the state of the switch also matches this particular value. So how do we do that? We're going to need to bring in a reference. So we're going to head over to the main.storyboard, and right here to the top, we're going to hold down Control, click and drag this guy over here, and we're going to call this switch view. Okay, let's remove this extra line. I'm going to go back to the view controller, and right here we want to say switch view dot is on, and this is going to be is on. So basically what this is doing is going to set the state of the view to be the same value. Now when we run this, we should see that the switch is on. Perfect. So now I'm going to turn this off, and I'm going to go ahead and restart the application, and we should see that the app is that's odd. I'm actually go ahead and close this guy like this, and I'm gonna click on this to open it again. So this is on. Now I'm gonna toggle this guy off. We're gonna close the application and put it. So it stayed off. So why didn't? I'm gonna have to research that. So running this again. Let me try running this again. So this is off. I'm going to turn it off right now and run it again. So it should still be on. This guy's messing with me. So anyhow, you can see that the data actually stays persistent. So I'm going to close this guy and open it again. So this is off. I'm going to turn it on. I'm going to close the application one more time and turn this guy on. And it works. So this is a way that we were able to basically save data to the user defaults database, and whenever we launch the app, we can basically just restore the state that the app was at before it was closed. So you can see that you can actually do a lot with this. You can store the user's configuration, you can adapt the app, or just basically, you know how you're using an app and you basically personalize it to the way a user wants, and you can basically just give them that kind of feel. All right, so user defaults is a very nice application, but there are things you shouldn't be doing. So you can store quite a lot of data in user defaults, but you shouldn't be storing like sensitive data. You shouldn't be storing like user token. In fact, if you can get them from the backend, then maybe you should just get it from the backend. We're going to take this one step further, and I'm going to show you how I use the user defaults. So you can see right over here how we have some all this kind of functions and stuff, and this one is actually simple. So imagine that we're trying to store a custom object, which is what we're going to be doing over here. So just to give you a pro or an advanced tip, right? So I'm going to create a new file right here, and I'm going to call this file UserDefaults Extension. All right, so basically what I do in this file, so I'm just going to minimize this, is so I create an extension of the user defaults, and what I do is right here I specify the different functions that are going to allow me to be able to directly store and retrieve data from the user defaults, right? You can do it as an extension. You can decide to maybe create a struct as a manager that is going to basically do this same thing. All right, but I usually just use the extension. So the first thing I do is I create an enum. So you can just make this private func. So I create an enum over here, and I can call this user defaults keys, and this is going to be of type string. All right. So in this place, I basically just specify the key. So you can see over here, we had to specify this key twice. So switch is on, switch is on. So I basically just have a single, like an enum that's, what did I just do over here? And I didn't see it. Get out of here, man. Good. So I'm just creating an enum, and I'm making it private. So an enum called user defaults keys. And so the key in our case is going to be short memory, get a node. So switch is on, and this is going to be the key for the particular function I want to make. Good. Now, the next thing I do is I create a computed property here, and in our case, I'm just going to call this switch is on, and this computed property is going to be of type Boolean. Now, the next thing I do is I create two things, the get and the set. So the get is this is when or this particular block of code is going to be executed when you try to access this particular variable, right? So if you're trying to get the value of this function is triggered. So if you're trying to get the value of switch is on, what we want to do is we actually want to just access our user defaults instead dot standard dot. I remember how we did it. So we want to get the Boolean for key, and now for key, rather than passing in a string, and this is actually why I have the enum right here, what I do is I simply say user defaults keys dot switch is on dot row value, just like this. So this is going to give us the string. So if I wanted to change the key for any reason, I just have to change it right here, and it's going to affect wherever we have this. Okay, so now we have our switches on. So whenever you're trying to get the the value for switches on, is going to execute this and basically just return the value from the user defaults. And if you try to set, so if you do something like switch is on equals something like this, then it's going to trigger this guy. And when it does that, what we want to do is we want to store the data in user defaults again. So user defaults is standard, just like what we did in the view controller. So this is going to be dot set value, and we're setting value to be new value, and the key is going to be the user defaults keys dot, did you guess right? Switch is on dot row value. Perfect. So now we're going to make sure that this actually works as it should. So I'm going to head over to the view controller, and I'm going to get rid of this. So let's delete this. So now whenever you toggle the switch on, what we want to do is we want to say user defaults dot shared, standard, I don't know why I say shared. So dot standard dot, so now you're going to see that we have a computed property called switch is on, like this, and now we can simply just pass in is sender is on. So you can see it's just like accessing a predefined variable inside of user defaults, right? It just makes it feel a little bit more, I don't know what the word is. So anyhow, if we wanted to just store this, we just store it as if we're storing in a regular variable. And you can see that we've actually made things, even though not so much, but it looks way cleaner. And I'm going to show you one way that it looks way more clear. So now here, when we want to get the value of the switch, we won't be doing this anymore. Instead, we'll be saying user defaults dot standard dot switch is on. Oops. Just like that. Very simple. So this handles both the get and the set. So we're setting the value of the user defaults. Here we're getting the value. I'm just going to run this just to make sure that everything works well. Good. So now the default state is on, or the previous state was on. So I'm going to turn it off, and I'm going to close the application like this, just to make sure that restart it doesn't mess us again. So very good. So this is still off. I'm going to turn it back on. I'm going to close the application and click right there, and it works. Perfect. So the last thing I'm going to show you is how to store a custom data into your user defaults. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new file, and I'm going to call this I don't know what to call this. I'm just going to call this user. Let me just call it user. All right. So I'm trying to create a user object. So I'm going to create a struct here and say user, and this user is going to have a name, a string, and a let's call this a first name, and a last name. All right, perfect. So this is a user object that I want to store in the user defaults. All right, so what I want to do is I'm going to go over to the user defaults, and actually if you look over here, we could actually just get rid of this. We don't need all of this because this is an extension of the user defaults. So we are already a user defaults object. We don't need to go and explicitly use the standard. So the idea of using this instead, and let me just get rid of this first of all. So the idea of using this directly means that if for any reason I don't want to use the standard over here, so maybe I want to store the user defaults into a different user defaults object. So when I do this, this value is going to be updated and retrieved from this particular instance of the user defaults. All right, so just say for example I create this like this, and this is for a particular or a different target. So this is going to give us the value from this. All right, so yeah, it's very important for us to have that like this. All right, good. So now we want to create the same thing for storing the user object. So what I'm going to do here is, first of all, I want to create a key, and this is going to be called, let's say, signed in user. Okay, so this is going to be the signed in user, and now I'm going to implement the attribute for this particular one, and I'm going to call this signed in user as well. And this is going to return a user object, but this is going to be optional. So it's possible that the user is not signed in, and if that's the case, it's going to return nil if the user is not signed in. So that's why we're making this optional. So still, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to have a get. We're also going to have a set. Okay. So let's actually start with the get. So now, if I want to get the user default object from the user defaults, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say just the same way we did this, but now we're not going to be using bool, we're going to be using object, because this is going to return a value of type any. Okay, so object for key, and the key is going to be user defaults keys dot user signed in user dot row value. Perfect. Okay, so now that we have this, what we want to do is we want to say if let data. So we're going to cast this. So if data is equal to this as data, then we want to decode this data into this object. So now we're casting our any, our type any, our user object into data. And now that we have it as data, we can actually just say let user be equal to try. So I'm going to do an optional try and say JSON decoder dot decode, and we're going to be decoding to type user dot self, and the data is of course going to be data. So now this is going to try to decode this, and when it's done, we're just going to return user. So this is going to be an optional user, but this isn't working now. Let's see the error. It's saying instance method decode requires that user conform to decodable. And if you followed my tutorial about decodable, encodable, and decodable, then you're gonna know how to fix this very easily. So we're just gonna head over to the user object, and we're just simply gonna say put this and say decodable. So we're saying that this user conforms to the decodable protocol. Perfect. So now if we go back and we try and build this, it should perfect. So now the error is gone. So this is going to try to decode this data into a user. Since we have the optional try right here, it's going to just return nil if it doesn't work, and we're going to return the user like that. Now otherwise, if it doesn't get data, or if the value is not a data, we simply want to return nil. All right, so we don't have that data in our user defaults. Perfect. So now this is it for the get, and let's go ahead and implement the set. So whenever you try to set data here, so imagine the user is trying to sign out. So let's say, for example, you signed out a user. We want to set the value of this to nil. All right, so a user can set a nil. So what we want to do is we want to do a check first of all. So we'll say if the new value is equal to nil. So if the new value is equal to nil, we simply want to delete the value of the signed in user. So how do we do that? We have a remove object function right here. So we're going to call this function, and what is the key? We want to delete user default keys dot signed in user dot row value. All right, very simple, very straightforward. All right, so otherwise, so now at this point we know that we're trying to set the user's data, right? So data actually exists over here. So what we want to do, so remember here we're trying to decode the data. So it means that for us to be able to decode the data, then it was encoded sometime, right? So this is data. Now right here what we want to do is we want to store the data, or want to first of all convert this user object into data. So how do we do that? We're just going to say let data be equal to, and this is going to be JSON encoder, dot encode. And what do we want to encode? We want to encode new value, of course. Perfect. So this is going to encode the new value into a type data. But again, this didn't work. Let's look at the error. It says it has to conform to encodable. So how do we fix that? Head over to the user object, and you're going to have to add encodable over here. Or you could just change both of them and just use codable, because codable is the combination of both decodable and encodable. Perfect. So now we're going to go back and let's actually build this and see that it, of course, so now this is going to be try, or we're going to try to do this. So you can use try. Remember, we've actually learned about how to handle errors. So I actually have a video on that in case you don't understand what this is doing over here. I'm going to leave a link to that. So let's see, are we having issues? Let's build this, should be good. All right, so now we're going to try to encode the data, and basically what we're doing over here is we're trying to convert this to data. Okay, so when this is converted, what we're going to do next is we're going to say set value, and we're going to be setting value to be data, which is what we just created over here. And the key, of course, is going to be the user defaults dot signed in user dot row value. Just like that, very simple. So I'm just going to quickly run through this just so that you understand the flow together. So basically this is my user default structure. So first of all, whenever I want to add in new data to the user defaults, the first thing I do is I add that key over here. All right. So now that I have the key added, and the idea of the key is just so that there is no duplicate string. So I'm not going to be passing in strings all through my application. I'm just going to use a single one. So if for any reason in future I want to change this, I'm just going to change it in a single source, and the key for this particular user defaults value is going to change, and I won't need to modify any part of the code. All right, so that's why I have this right here. Okay, so now that I've added this, depending on the kind of data I want to add, if it's a simple data like Boolean integer, then this is very well okay. But if you want to be adding like custom objects, then we need to do some things different. So what we're doing, first of all, if you want to set data and you want to be setting a nil data, so if you're setting nil, we're assuming that you want to just remove the data from the user defaults. And if that's the case, we're simply going to say, okay, so you want to remove it. All right, so I'm just going to call the remove, and I'm removing the data that is in this particular key. Okay. So if you weren't trying to remove, but you were trying to actually set a new data, then what I want to do is I want to first of all convert that data, which is the custom struct, the user object. I want to convert that into a data type, so data, a data. So when that is done, then I want to go ahead and set that data in our user default and basically just save that information. Great, and that's that. Now, when I want to retrieve data from that, so remember we're storing it as data right here. So I'm going to be retrieving the data, and this is going to be of type data because that's how it was stored. So now that we have that, the next thing we want to do is to decode the data into the type that I know it was stored in. Okay, so this is going to decode the data into a user object, store it right here, and then pass it back to the user. And all of these complexities, let me show you how easy it's going to be to use it. So now let's say now a view controller, I wanted to save a new user. So I'm going to say let user equals user. And first name is going to be Emmanuel, last name is going to be Aquara. So if I wanted to save this data in the user defaults, this is how I'm going to do it. I'm just going to say user defaults dot standard dot signed in user, and this is going to be equal to user. That's it. Very simple, very straightforward. All of the complexities gone, and we have just a single line of code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this application once. Okay, so first of all, let's actually hide this. And first, let's print to see the signed in user. So the signed in user is, so I'm just going to print in user defaults. So this is us trying to get the data from the user defaults database dot standard dot signed in user. So remember, we've not added any value to this user defaults database yet. So when we run this, we should see nil. So the signed in user is nil. All right, so you can see over here that it says the signed in user is nil. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add a signed in user, this guy. So I'm just going to add it once. So let's run this. Or I should have actually, let me see. So I'm going to remove this right now. And let's bring back the print statement and run this. Okay, so you can see that now that we ran the application, so remember the first time we ran it, it was nil because no user had been added to the user defaults. So now we've actually run the application and you can see that the signed in user is, and you can see my name, Emmanuel and Okara, just like that. So the same way we can, of course, decide to set this back to nil. So if I were to run this, so let me just remove this, just so that you're sure that like the data is persisted. So I'm going to run this like this, and so now I'm going to remove this line of code, and we're going to run this application again. So basically what we did before was we removed the user that was stored in the user defaults. So that should have triggered the remove this particular function over here. It should have triggered this guy. And because of that, you can see that now it says the signed in user is nil. So basically you can see how by doing this over here, by doing this particular block of code like this, we've actually just made the actual application much cleaner. So if you wanted to at any point access the user default data, or just you wanted to see if the user is signed in, you can just get your user defaults and just get the value of this particular variable. If you wanted to update the data, then you can directly just add data to that user default, or simply just add a user object. So this is going to do all of the encoding and decoding and just make things much cleaner. So more people may not want to use an extension like this, and they may want to just instead create a struct or a class to serve as a manager. So you may see people do something like let's call this user defaults manager. All right, and this is going to have a shared instance if you wanted to use a singleton. So you say shared equals user defaults manager like this, and you can set the private private init, just so that you can't create another instance of this particular struct, right? You could do that if you're using a class, use a singleton, but for a struct, you're pretty safe. So then after doing this, then maybe they now create the computer property over here and say signed in user as user, and then they have the set and the get, which returns, I don't know, let's say user Yeah, so they have something like this precisely, and here, rather than using the user defaults, they would now say user defaults manager dot shared dot signed in user equals, yeah. So yeah, it just depends on what you want to do. So if you want to go the route of using an extension, that then you can do this. If you want to go the route of using a manager, it's basically exactly the same thing, I guess. So rather than having all of these things here in an extension, we just move all of these into the function, into this guy like this. That's it, right? So just go ahead, use whatever method works best for you, and yeah, at this point you're gonna have to create an instance of the user defaults. Well, the video is already too long, but anyhow, if you have confusions about what I've said, if there was any point in this video that wasn't clear, then just feel free to ask questions in the comment section. I'll try and answer as quickly as possible. And if there's some areas that you want me to shed more light, then just let me know and I will do that. Until then, actually look out for the next video, because we're going to be going into some very interesting stuff. We're going to be going into core data. So just prepare yourself, and see you guys in the next video. Yomi, which is finished, and what that does is allows us. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. For those of you who are Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. For those of you who are new, my name is Emmanuel, and we've actually been working on an amazing application.